We gather today, many of us deeply disturbed, deeply saddened by what's going on around us, especially in this country, the United States. And I know our Canadian brothers and sisters just across the border, I know and have heard from some of you that you feel this as well, even in your country. We are living through an unbelievable moment right now, an unbelievable tragic moment. And to be clear, it's not a new moment. You know, people in the Black community have been experiencing many moments like this, hundreds of years of moments of violence, of racism, of systemic bias, and various forms of slavery and brutality. And I could not talk about this today, because to me, this is a deeply spiritual issue. What we see around us right now, this level of outrage that's erupting. I found some words to help me understand it better. And those words come from one of our great teachers in this domain, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And though these words were spoken back in 1967, right down the road from here at Stanford University, they ring true right now, just as they did then. So I'd like us to listen to the wisdom of this doctor in his words here. I think America must see that riots do not develop out of thin air. Certain conditions continue to exist in our society, which must be condemned as vigorously as we condemn riots. But in the final analysis, a riot is the language of the unheard. And what is it that we have failed to hear? We have all failed to hear that the plight of the Negro has worsened over the last years. We have failed to hear that the promises of freedom and justice have not been met. And we have failed to hear that large segments of white society are more concerned about tranquility and the status quo than they are about justice, equality, and humanity. And so in a real sense, our nation's summer of riots are caused by our nation's winters of delay. As long as we in America postpone justice, we stand in the position of having these recurrences of violence and riots again and again. Social justice and progress are the only guarantors of riot prevention. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. So what this says to me is that what is going on so blatantly right now in front of us on full display, what this is showing us, what this is showing me is a level of suffering that I can't turn away from anymore. I can't ignore. And it took me quite a few days, I hate to admit, to sit down and watch the video of George Floyd. I saw clips on the news and I looked away. I didn't want to see it, didn't want to sit through it. And I saw in me this response that I teach others about, that I teach entire workshops and trainings about, this response in me that was like a total aversion to suffering, a resistance to looking suffering in the face head on, meeting it directly, confronting it, having the courage to face it. You know, and we've talked about this before in this very sanctuary, this primitive human impulse that we all have to different degrees to move away from pain. You know, it doesn't make us bad people, it just makes us subject to our more primitive, more biological nature, which is to push away discomfort, especially when that discomfort feels like it's too much to bear. You know, and we may have thoughts going on in our mind to justify that. You know, why should I watch this? How is this going to help? I'm going to lay in bed at night thinking about this. What does it matter if I watch this? Those are all the mind's rationales for pushing away that which we find unbelievably confronting and uncomfortable. And as I saw myself doing that, you know, the light bulb went off, and I remembered these teachings that I've been teaching for a while now, that specifically the teachings on compassion, and how those teachings are absolutely crucial right now in a situation like this. Compassion, unfortunately, is very misunderstood, and it often gets lumped with empathy, and empathy is a part of the compassionate response in us. It's sort of, you could say, a precursor to compassion, but it's really important, I think, to understand what compassion is, which is really a process that starts in us with recognizing suffering. Compassion always arises as a response to suffering. Empathy is, we can empathize with many different emotions and many different situations, but compassion is our particular response that happens when we turn towards suffering, and when that suffering moves us, and moves us in a way that causes us to want to alleviate that suffering. That's compassion. That's very different from just feeling what somebody else is feeling. That's part of it. That's a very important part of it. But compassion, inbuilt into the definition of compassion, is we respond wanting to help relieve that suffering. We respond wanting to act. But we can't do that. That response can't arise in us unless we first and foremost are willing to turn towards the suffering. And that was what I got to see in myself, my own momentary unwillingness to face this suffering, to watch this suffering. And so yesterday I finally sat down with these teachings in mind, kind of bolstering me up to sit down and watch the video of a human being being held down, pinned down by a police officer who's supposed to protect us, supposed to keep us safe, and a fellow human being who was held in that position for almost 9 minutes, including 3 minutes where he was clearly completely limp and unconscious. So once you see that, you can't unsee it. And that, I think, is the message I want to get out to myself today, to anyone watching this, that seeing it, facing it, did something to me. It did break open another level of compassion in me with regards to this issue. And it did remind me how, even if I have no idea how to fix it, even if I have no idea how to solve it, even if I feel completely helpless, to never forget that I must not turn away from it because of those things, that I must come back to meet that suffering, that I must choose that as the first step in this dilemma that we're in. And then the next step, of course, is to take that awareness of that suffering to another level and ask myself, and I invite all of us into that inquiry. Where else have I turned away with regards to this issue, right? Where else have I been unaware? How have I, through my own silence or ignorance of what's really going on, how have I been complicit? Through silence, we can be very complicit, right? Through ignorance, we've allowed a system, a systemic system to perpetuate for hundreds of years. And when I look out on Facebook, when I read things from people who I respect, you know, what I can see is sort of a common thread from the Black people around me is a profound asking of me to wake up, to open my eyes, to open my heart to the reality of what it means to be Black today in North America and in other places too. So it's a profound opportunity for my own wake-up call, for our wake-up call, especially those of us living in the dominant culture, the white culture, especially those of us in positions of any kind of power or influence. Any way that we can use that privilege for the good versus just taking advantage without knowing it of the system that we've created and perpetuated all these years, you know, a system in which I, as a white person, never have to think about, you know, leaving my house, going down to the gas station to pump gas, going bird watching. I don't have to think about a police officer arresting me and murdering me. That's a privilege I have as somebody who's part of this dominant culture. And it's important for me to recognize that that is not the reality of so many. And anything I can do to use this privilege in a way to fight for that justice is asked and demanded of me now. It's been demanded of me for hundreds of, you know, it's been demanded of us for hundreds of years, but here is another moment where we can choose. We're at a choice point. And that's why I said to you, for me, this is deeply spiritual. If we are really up to a spiritual journey of any kind, then we're really up to looking at how we treat our fellow human beings. That's the basis that all spiritual wisdom, all religious wisdom is founded on. How do we manage our own biases? How do we even become aware of the biases we don't know we have? That's the only thing that's going to lead to us really living our spirituality in this world. You know, it's easy to be spiritual over here on my meditation cushion, and that's important too. But if that doesn't translate into the world, it's not real spirituality, it's escapism. So I want to invite us today with compassion for ourselves to look to see. You could do this in your journal. You could do this just in a closed-eyed reflection. I know many of you are probably already doing this because I know so many of you, and I know the profound thinkers and beings that you are. And so I'm just going to ask you to continue doing something that many of you are already, I'm sure, doing, which is to look at what's my part in this, right? What's my part in this? This isn't just something that's occurring over there. There is no over there. We're all part of one system. So take a moment. If it's easier, you can do that by writing or by reflecting, and ask, how am I complicit? How do I participate in this system? Where do I have bias of my own that I may not have fully explored? Where do I stay silent when I know I could speak out? So take a moment just to be curious, compassionately curious about this for yourself.